Don't let pimples distract you. Use Pond's Men Acne Solution. Stay clear and in the zone.
Get a Gomo SIM, 25 gig, no expiry data for $299.
For the first time ever, this week's guest video uses art and animation. 12 Tone is a channel about music theory that uses pen and paper and piano notes and doodles of elephants. But today, they are also talking about language. 12 Tone?
Hey, welcome to 12 Tone, or to put that another way. Okay, that may have sounded like a nice but strange melody, but it was actually a sentence in La Langue Musicale Universelle, or the Universal Musical Language, also known as Sol Re Sol. Sol Re Sol was invented in the mid-19th century by a French musician named Jean-François Sudre, who'd become fascinated with the idea of a language made of music. His first attempt, which he called La Téléphonie, was fairly straightforward. He just took the French alphabet and assigned each letter to a musical note. This wasn't really a new language, though. It was more like a code, and it found its home where most codes do, the military. Sudre tried to sell his system to the French army and later the Navy, but despite early interest, they never actually paid him for it. He even built a series of properly tuned cannons in order to increase the volume of his transmissions, but to no avail. Still, though, he wasn't about to give up on his dream. Instead, he set his sight on an even more ambitious task, a universal second language. His goal was to create a language that was bound to no particular country, one that every person learned in addition to their native tongue, allowing free communication across cultural borders. But just converting French into a musical code wasn't good enough for that. Sudre was going to have to invent a real language. To do this, he turned to a system of musical notation known as solfege. This is that do-re-mi stuff Julie Andrews was singing about. Well, almost. In The Sound of Music, the notes are do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, do, which is the English method, but most other countries in Europe use si instead, and since Sudre was French, that's what he did. Anyway, having so few possible syllables presents a fairly obvious problem. In English, it's hard to even guess how many single-syllable words there are, but one estimate I found puts it at roughly 7,000. Sol Re Sol, on the other hand, has 7. These are reserved for only the most basic elements of communication like yes, no, and the. Two-syllable words aren't much better. There's 49 possible combinations used for things like pronouns, greetings, and common descriptors like good and bad. They're also used for conjugation. Sol Re Sol can't fit a bunch of different words for each verb, so instead it has one verb form, the present, and then just uses a set of two-syllable words to tell you about the tense. But where things get really interesting are the larger words, which have the room to build in some structures. Three-syllable words are loosely divided into groups of 6 based on the first two notes. Words starting with sol-si are based on fun and games, including run, laugh, and smile. Words starting with re-la, on the other hand, are negative traits like misanthropy, distrust, and intolerance. At 4 syllables, he takes this concept to a whole new level, breaking all the words up into 7 groups called keys based on their first syllable. The key of do, for instance, is all about humanity, including the body, mind, and spirit. The key of re is for words about the household and family. Mi is for actions and flaws, fa is for travel and war, sol is for art and science, la is for industry, and si is for government. There's also a second set of keys that come up when your word includes a note repeated twice in a row, although their meanings are usually related to the main key. And that's it. Sudre's language only went up to 4 syllables with less than 3,000 total words. The 5th syllable was left open for future development in case new words were needed, but by carefully removing things like synonyms, tense, and parts of speech, which are managed exclusively through accents rather than new words, he managed to squeeze quite a lot of meaning into just those 3,000. Sadly, while Sudre's work made him famous, at least in certain circles, it never repaid him for the time and money he put into it. To quote the writer Paul Collins, Sol Re Sol is at heart the philanthropic effort of an idealist, and the brotherhood of mankind does not issue quarterly dividend checks. After Sudre's death, though, his wife Josephine took up the cause, and the language started to pick up steam, with thousands of speakers and a society for its preservation founded in Paris, culminating in 1902 with the publication of a guide to its grammar by the head of the society, Boleslas Gaevsky. But the dream of a true universal language was fading, so preservationists focused on another of Sudre's selling points, accessibility. You see, Sol Re Sol doesn't actually have to be based on music. It's got 7 characters and can be grafted onto any set of 7 items, like the 7 colors of the rainbow, or more importantly, 7 specific hand gestures. This meant that anyone who knew the spoken language could easily learn it as a sign language as well, making it an incredibly useful tool in communicating with deaf people. Gaevsky's guide emphasized this possibility, but there was a problem. At the time, deaf education in Europe was dominated by a philosophy called oralism, which is basically the idea that deaf people should still learn to speak and that teaching them sign languages got in the way. To be clear, this is no longer considered a reasonable approach, but for Gaevsky, it meant that the language he loved was cut off from the people it could help the most. So who knows, maybe if turn-of-the-century educators in France had been a bit more forward-thinking, we'd all be speaking in notes right now. Probably not. But maybe.
12 Tone? Go subscribe to them for more videos like that one. I would recommend starting with their video about the Imperial March from Star Wars. Next week, the last guest video, which features a Canadian.
The Esperanto language.
Esperanto.
Numbers.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Greetings and phrases.
Saluton, bonan matenon, bonan vesperon, bonan nocton, gis, adiaŭ, gis la revido.
Dunia and the Enchanted Forest.
Dunia kaj la sorĉa arbaro. Antaŭ multaj jaroj, en suda regiono de Esperantujo, loĝis infanino apud arbaro, kies nomo estis Dunia. Dunia loĝis en granda bela domo kun ŝia patro, ŝia patrino kaj ŝia frateto Mumu. Dunia estis lerta, inteligenta kaj tre laborema. Ŝi amis legi dikajn librojn kaj pasi multajn horojn en la biblioteko de ŝia patro. Ofte Dunia iris al arbaro por renkonti ŝian amikon Puko, kiu loĝis ene de sorĉa arbego. Puko estis juna sorĉisto kaj kune kun Dunia protektis la plantojn kaj la bestojn de la arbaro kontraŭ malbona sorĉistino kiu loĝis en malnovan nigran kastelon. Tiu tago Dunia preparis sin por eliri kaj renkonti ŝian amikon. Ŝi enmetis en ŝia tornistro manĝaĵon, sorĉan bastonon kaj ŝnuron. Mumu ĉiam akompanis ŝin. Ŝi eniris en la arbaron kaj subite aperis teruran monstron. Sed Dunia rapide grimpis arbon kaj surbranĉe prenis ŝian bastonon kaj ekkriis fajron, kaj la monstro estis fulmita per fajrlumo. Dunia trakuris surarbare ĝis atingis la arbegon kie loĝis ŝia amiko. Saluton, Dunia! Kiel vi fartas? Mi fartas bone, dankon. Kaj vi? Mi ankaŭ fartas bone, dankon, diris la knabo. Mi venis, ĉar mi vidis grandan truon en la kastelo de la sorĉistino, kaj ankaŭ mi aŭdis grandan bruon. Eble ŝi vokis drakon. Se ĝi estas tiel, ni devas halti ŝin. La arbaro povas esti en grava danĝero. Jes, vi pravas. Do ni, ekiru tien. Ili promenis ĝis la pinto de la monto, kie staris la kastelo, kaj subite aperis la sorĉistino, rajdante ruĝan fajran drakon. Ŝi perverse ridegis. Dunia tiam ekkriis: akvon, teron, fajron, venton! Dum Puko kriis: fulmotondron! Kaj fulmego erigis la sorĉistinon. Poste ĉiuj la arbaranoj ĝojis kaj festis la venkon, kaj fine la du geamikoj revenis hejmen.
Food Panda. Food and more delivered.
Hello there, I'm Philip Goodman. I'm an author. I write fiction and non-fiction, and my latest book is May We Borrow Your Language, There have been attempts to create artificial languages in the hope perhaps that one day they might be universally spoken, but all those attempts have failed. The most famous is probably Esperanto. Esperanto was a deliberate creation, I think, towards the end of the 19th century, and it was a sort of fusion of various European languages, so that the creator, or the theory behind it, was that you took a bit from one language and a bit from another language and a bit from a third and a bit from a fourth and so on, and you had a kind of mosaic of different terms which would somehow appeal to everybody because they would recognize bits of their own language in it. It had some success. There were certainly Esperanto societies, but it's faded, as have all other attempts to make up languages. Languages have to grow from the ground up. You know, you can't kind of build them like a house. They actually have to grow naturally and organically out of the ground. And though there seems on the one hand to be a tendency to clump languages together and kind of a greater uniformity, a sort of coming together, there's also a tendency in the opposite direction as well. People fight to preserve their own languages, and they develop new forms of the languages that they already speak. So language never stands still.
Saluton de Budapeŝto, Hungario, mi estas Stella, kaj la lingvo kiun mi parolas estas Esperanto. Kio estas Esperanto? Zamenhof en la 19. jarcento kreis tiun ĉi artefaritan lingvon, kiu estas mia denaska lingvo. Denaska signifas, ke miaj gepatroj, ambaŭ, fakte, parolis al mi la lingvon ekde mia naskiĝo. Do mi vere povas diri, ke tiu ĉi lingvo estas parto de mia vivo. Ĝi ne estas hobio, ne estas iu eta afero, ĝi estas vere ĉiutaga uzo por mi. Do por kio mi uzas Esperanton? Kompreneble mi uzas ĝin por kio ajn mi uzas lingvojn, ĉu ne? Mi aŭskultas muzikon, mi tre ŝatas babiladi kun miaj amikoj, voĉe aŭ skribe. Mi ankaŭ verkas iomete en Esperanto, mi faras podcastojn kaj organizas Esperantajn renkontiĝojn. Mi vere povas diri al vi, ke Esperanto-kulturo estas tio, kio pleje riĉigis mian vivon. Mi tre ĝojas havi tiom da internaciaj kontaktoj dank al la lingvo, kaj ankaŭ mi povas diri, ke dank al Esperanto kaj dank al tio, ke mi kreskis kun 2 lingvoj, lernado de aliaj lingvoj iĝis multe pli facila por mi. Mi parolas la anglan, la francan kaj la nederlandan, kaj ankoraŭ planas lerni kelkajn aliajn lingvojn. Do, tio estas mallonge pri mi. Mi esperas, ke vi ŝatas Esperanton aŭ ke vi planas lerni, aŭ lernos, aŭ jam lernas, kaj tre interesas min scii por kio vi uzas Esperanton.